this story then I guess will be told about a grove of trees who I consider to be family. And all of the usual suspects are there as far as grandmother and grandfather and playful cousin and etc. So it's, can you find the nourishment and the connection and the fulfillment of longings, both on an emotional level and a playful level? Where can you slide down the side of a redwood tree and cozy up and be held, you know, in the same grove? Yeah, so in southern Humboldt County, California, there is a grove of redwood trees that are, I don't know what their ancestral name would be known by, but you know, if you look at the sign on the highway, you'll look for Rockefeller Grove, which not really sure how Rockefeller spent the millions of dollars that he or whoever their family had, but somehow they were able to get a grove of trees named after them. And it doesn't seem totally to match the magic of the grove, but nonetheless, this grove of old growth is preserved along the banks of the Bull Creek. And Bull Creek is just a short flow out to the South Fork of the Eel River. And this grove that is very welcoming, the trees, it's pretty wide open in the understory. You can kind of look across a carpeted floor of sorrel and ferns, sword ferns, and you can see pretty deep into this little grove, and it really feels round, because the Bull Creek kind of bends right around it on the eastern side, and then there's a kind of a park road that flanks the west side. But when you get into the grove, the trees are just open and personable, and there's a lot of burl that is growing off of these redwoods. And back when I first started exploring it, you know, the burl told me more about the tree than almost anything else. Told me its gender, told me its kind of animal form. It told me its hopes and dreams. You know, the burl just at times would just speak obvious insights into who these particular trees were. And I think one reason that I don't highlight any one tree, I will highlight a couple trees, but I think one reason that it's about the grove is because it's a full experience to come into this grove on a cloudy, rainy January day when nobody else is in the park, and kind of have the run of the place to oneself. And of course, you know, so there's this perimeter trail that goes around the circumference of the grove. But a friend of mine and I would start playing the games of like, how much can we run on the fallen redwoods without touching the ground? And we could literally spend hours just tracking these 300-foot tall trees that were on the ground, and then hop to another one and follow it another 300 feet, and from tree to tree to tree. Sometimes we'd be 20 feet into the air on the side of the trees, and other times, we'd be just a few feet in the air. But the whole great grove, when I think about my ancestry, when I think about my relations, and when I first started into connection work, when the realization of me not having human relations that really felt nourishing to me. I don't have close relationships with my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents in my human legacy. I realized that these redwood trees were my ancestors of self. They taught me to be who I am, much in the way that I would expect a human family would teach their young. I think there's funny stories of, I used to sit and listen to the trees whistle, and they would have these whistles that go. And then I started learning about nature connection and bird language, and I learned that it was the varied thrush that was whistling, and all the while I thought it was the redwood trees. And so there's just points of learning that were really fun and make me laugh, and elicit a bit of humbleness around just who I was and how I became. There's trees, one at kind of the far south end of the circumference, with just a smaller fallen tree in front of it, almost like a bench, and I would sit on that bench outside a doorway. So many of these redwoods have little doorways into them that you can crawl in and stand inside the tree, and so the idea that these trees are portals or respites, or homes of gnomes and fairies and all magical creatures, just allowed that part of me to bloom in a really nice way. So yeah, I would sit outside of this one tree, who I think, if I reflect on the energy, I would think it's more of a cousin. It kind of just held space with me. It taught me about believing in magic, about believing that the little doorways into the trees was truly a being's doorway, and so and then 180 degrees from that tree across the circle of the grove was the grandmother tree. And I don't know, I don't ever know why she became the grandmother tree. It was just that was her presence, and so that kind of thing taught me, a lot of body radar, a lot of felt energy happening in the grove of nobody was guiding me in this. It was simply the trees that were guiding me in it. And so I didn't have the external language to think about. I wasn't in I was at the time studying to be a public school teacher, so I wasn't even in this kind of nature connection genre that people talk about and elevate all of these relationships. But I knew this one tree as grandmother tree, And I still think about her, you know, often, and you know, and the longings that I've held of, you know, not having um, a grandmother in my life, you know, maternal or paternal grandmother, that would offer me the safety or the security of embrace and uplifting words. You know, I go visit this grandmother, at least in my heart space, on a fairly regular basis, and so you know, she certainly is one of the trees there. You know, but so many of these trees, as they fall over and become an ancestor, to support the young, you know, and all around you see young redwoods coming up, and they can grow from their burls, they can grow from their seeds, but so many, they just grow from these small shoots coming around the, you know, they're growing out of the root system, I guess. And so, you know, there's multi generations all over the place in a redwood forest. And so, you know, when these large roots would, when the trees would fall and the whole root system comes up, I mean, the whole root system itself is, you know, 40 feet high, and, you know, you can climb up to that and just be on top of this massive root system. And again, just the poeticness, the stillness, and climbing these things are, you know, when they're on their side, the bark is handholds. You know, vertically, you'd have to kind of scale it with pinchers, but vertically, they're almost like ladders, or I mean, when it falls horizontally. Yeah, and so one of my favorite things that one of these trees offered, one of these fallen trees, is that this tree fell, and as it fell, the 6-inch bark, well, after, you know, as it fell, I imagine, I didn't see it fall. You know, so the tree fell, but the bark peeled off and flipped over, inverted to be perpendicular to the tree. And so the smooth inner bark, what in a concave way, was now the exposed outside, you know, facing up from the fallen tree down to the ground, which became a slide. And so I was out there with a buddy one time, and I was like, I'm going to slide down this thing. And it was probably 20 feet, 30 feet from the tree down to the ground. And so it was a little bit sketchy because wasn't really sure what was going to happen. But I slid down, and it was fantastic. It was quick and fast, and nothing broke, including myself. And so I would go back, and every time I'd go back, I'd go for a couple slides down this tree. And so the playfulness, you know, I was in my mid-20s, late 20s then. And, you know, again, allowing, you know, the tree just gifting that playfulness of being, you know, being a child in the forest, you know. So that playfulness that, you know, that we encourage, you know, now with a nature connection language, we encourage the playfulness. You know, I think so much, and we encourage it in that way of like childlike playfulness. And you know, so just that reflection of how this redwood grove offered that to me, just speaks volumes to me of how much we need to listen to the trees to learn how to become ourselves. You know, all of the things that went on and still go on in that grove, but went on for me in my late 20s, mid to late 20s, were lessons that of just welcoming, of playfulness, of curiosity, and if I think about, 8 shields is 8 attributes of connection. I could pretty much go around the wheel and think about these 8 attributes of welcoming and childlike happiness in the East. It was ticked off in that grove. The vitality of, like, the movement of running over the lengths of these and jumping over gaps to go from one fallen tree to the next, or climbing up the side of a root, or sliding down the offered slide, to then just the mentoring of the trees, the sitting, the focus that I spent, the hours of time just sitting with these trees and learning. It's curious, but I don't know, could I track my mentoring, ability to these trees, the way they, sat with me, or the thrush, that every time I hear a varied thrush now, it takes me immediately back to that grove of trees. And I laugh at myself for believing that the trees were whistling, and then to just the empathy and the wandering within these trees that opened up just curiosity and magic and kind of the wonder that is so valuable, to just our spirits, to the gifts of these trees, from their burls that, would just make me, just, you would see faces. I remember a gorilla faced burl in one of the trees. The way, the redwood, I guess they're, other than their taproot, they don't go very deep. Their roots don't go very deep. So they're kind of holding on to each other. So they can topple fairly easily. And so, with all that new research of, life of trees, or, the chemicals and communication that are being shared via roots and, the different sugars and things that they feed each other. Curious what's going on under the ground for all these redwood trees, and whether they, to me, it seems like they must absolutely view themselves as one organism, or at least one being that supports that bend in the river. Because a lot of those redwood groves, and who know, it would be beautiful to see what that place looked like, pre-European sawmills, because it's, nowadays it's really hard to get deep into an old growth redwood forest. There's lots of these beautiful groves around, but all of the groves are fairly small, the old growth ones, at least, the second or third growth you can get in there and get a little further along, but for the big trees, and there may be isolated old growth trees here and there far from roads or whatnot, but yeah, so I feel like they are, standing together there, really kind of supporting, ancient wisdom and knowledge, and really bringing that into the future. And from all that, I believe, I believe I'm a descendant of those trees, certainly in a lineage wisdom way. I certainly don't have illusions that I was, literally born from these trees from some magical, whatever. But yeah, I believe that they have shared their wisdom and continue to share it with anybody who comes into this grove. And as soon as you get in there, the smell, the stillness, the calmness, the gentleness, everything is just is right there. Yeah.
What would be a one-word message that the Grove would like to share with the world?
Mm. It's, yeah, so first love comes, but based on our conversation last week, I feel like that's the default easy word. And so trust came into my mind. Believe comes into my mind. Understanding comes into my mind.
Okay, so having experienced those trees on many connections over the years, that grove, what's a phrase that you use in your work that you can contribute or attribute back to your experience with the grove? That's a way that you honor that grove every time you share it. What would be a phrase?
Wow. I love that question. Well, so what's coming to mind, and so it's not a phrase that I use, but when I moved away from that area, I moved south to Oakland, California, and probably 50 miles south of that grove, there's an old, I feel like metal shop on the side of the road just south of Laytonville, California. And on the side of the shop in big, it's like a sign, a metal sign that's white with black writing, and it says, "Don't forget the magic." And it's probably a 30-foot long by 3-foot high sign on the side of this wooden shop. And so that sign, "Don't forget the magic," has always, that. So after I had moved away, and then after I met my wife, and she and I would go up to that grove and visit and drive back down, that sign, it's always "Don't forget the magic." And again, I've never said that. And even trying to turn things from the deficit to the opportunity of, like, don't forget the magic to remember the magic, is something that we've played around with, just language wise. But I, it's interesting. I was just writing something the other day, so I guess I used the word magic in my ideology of what I want the world to get. I you know, as a kid, and you know, I'm into sleight of hand tricks and, you know, magic tricks kind of thing. um and so I guess I feel like that phrase, you know, what I want to share with kids is to basically to to not forget the magic, to but to and it's not even to remember the magic, it's to slow down enough to see the magic. um you know, yesterday, with the we were creating these ancestor orbs, we called them. And so the kids needed to find a nature item that represented themselves. And then once they did that, they needed to, well, similar to what we did on touchstones, they had to wrap that with their parents, then wrap that with their grandparents, and then their great grandparents and great. And so to go back 7 generations. Um, and so the magic of, and it was a magic moment, they all got out of their heads into their bodies, started wandering around the woods doing this. And like a couple kids were like, gosh, I realized I used the same item for myself and my great grandmother. And there was a lot of magic at play happening. I'm only connecting this now, that's a phrase that I would want to enliven in my time. You know, and honestly, today I woke up, and after having to cancel our classes, and you know, there's times where I feel that, like, what is the point of all of this? You know, parents that get upset with me despite their kids loving me. You know, the parents yell at me at times, and you know, employees show up late, and you know, it feels like there's always some sort of headache or heartache that is, you know, that my shoulders are asked to carry. And at times I really wonder what you know, what am I trying to do, and what is the point of it? And so that, you know, talking about that phrase feels good. Like, yeah, don't forget the magic. There is something going on here. Yeah. And if we can get out of our fidgety heads into our bodies, we can actually, you know, and that magic, you know, I believe, you know, a synonym could be connection. A synonym could be love. You know, I think a synonym could be lots of different words that flow, reciprocity, that just, you know, talks about the exchange of nourishing energy.